recent video is there of sort of a quick leave sort of motion, and therefore that's all the points about Nazi completely, and whether that's most of the points about Nazis. And while there's tonnage of distortion sets, this is simply kill them all. And by the reason they have killed them all. And whether also erase and delete, erratify towards. Balance has been lost. That's a major issue. On whether it ain't there no more. And whether recent they're just as with one of whether the recent mentioned there, and whether also whether recent found which whether on whether of as statements are probable for it also to be. It's not Poland. It's not in Russia. If it was in Russia, probably it will be also difficult. That may projected to be much more of a better situation, and whether recent whether a much better in situation. We're supposed to perform at a certain level, and those don't have to even perform. It's not, the whole thing is simply decided by them. They're the judges there. They take position. They have positions, whether they have careers. Even if they're fake, they have a career. And their number being treated as if per capita. They are the kings. It's gotten to so bad that they don't want, the case of the Gorans, they don't even want to know the situation, because it's inevitable. They're going to result to some kind of major clash. In a way, it's almost like I know nature well, whether I know a lot of stuff, whether I also know, whether I know a lot of stuff also. For instance, and while I perform, I maintain, I monitor and I keep track. I notice how I perform. To the extent that's far enough, and usually the mention of that sort of opposite, whether expresses and whether presents opposite, or whether presents more of opposite of, since they highlight something to it. So, for example, it's a accountable as probably and describable also from whether also describable for whether recent or whether describable for whether another, whether also describable of as whether sort of a awkward moment, whether awkward mention, whether discussion of. To ask for there to be humble persons is not remotely extreme. In the absence of such, because we actually don't have justice around, it should be auto-balanced, not me having to go into each country and having to balance it out. There should be local, there should be an elder, there should be respect towards the parents. How did parenthood even get combated? What kind of sick mental idea is to send them to all this squeeze and does all that project? This is where a lot of the fuss really began. And this traumatized a lot of the Gorms. It's not good, in particular because it's not sanctioned, whether it's segregation or different word. That word is completed, so it's almost a whole nother realm. It's a mental-fustly realm that deserves to be nuked and not discussed. Suppose one check on the track record, which one is the low life? They are the lowest life. What are they made of? They have a large cerebral, and what cerebral is coordinated with large cerebral, larger intestine. The intestine is the lowest organ of all. The stuff comes is bile, and naturally there needs to be some sort of great maintenance, or the entity operates differently. It operates illy in a way that is still functionality healthy, but completely. It's almost like self getting infiltrated, and whether it's like an empire, or whether a castle that's infiltrated, filled with filth. It is not filth that's filled with brand names, or whether filth that's labeled as Axe spray, or whether sort of fragrance along comes with the bile. And whether amongst other description of the usually it's much demanded I to explain a lot about it as if they couldn't get it. The Nazis all can understand it, whether the feminazis reason it. That's sort of considerable as opens up a sort of topic. We got a major crisis ongoing. English for Verminia English language is set to so you can only speak in a certain way, and the social it's a giant. They contaminate all the way to social level. How am I supposed to register? Whether to the culture level, and how am I supposed to rescue when it's all the way to the culture levels, whether social, whether also the social, whether the civil responsibilities whether the civil duties and the social notions are effectively Nazis. Who runs the education campus? We could have some billionaire sort of giving advices. The operation are done by those. If they're allowed to operate, and how are they given sort of, if they do something different and there comes a buzz, can maximum have a lawsuit? I mean, they are free and they are utterly leeches, too many leeches. The level of patheticness fully matches whether utterly and whether plentiful patheticness along with dramatism. And that can be a considerable vicious combo there. The further list of the dysfunction on treatments, whether more descriptions of there can be of, and probably can be findable on numerous mediums, not just on my personal, whether on the blog or whether on the blog, or whether on blog, or whether essentially reason for whether reason of essentially whether reason of there are considerable other descriptions suitable, and whether there are other dysfunction that's untreated, so whether there are other dysfunction untreated, so whether there are other that's untreated, so whether there are other dysfunction, and whether reason there are other dysfunction that's untreated, so whether there are other treatments, and whether there are other untreated, so whether reasons directed to whether reason there are other that's untreated. The reason there, and whether as dys on whether you and probably the more suitable, whether reasons probable of, and whether probable of more suitable of the probable of also suitable of, and whether reason to suitable of thereof, and whether reason thereof, and whether reason to suitable of thereof, and whether to probable of also to good of, to probable of also to suitable of, and whether to probable of also to good of, to probable of also to good of, and whether to probable to good of. It's utterly inflictions. I probably is doing something not as particular to optimum, because I should be actually having more battle stance. Having more sort of battle stance can get you into police custodies, right? And these ones supposed to be not have it. They're not with us. It's hypocrite quiz towards us to allow associated. Essentially, we gotta kill off so many targets, whether erasing and deleting also. Why is there so many quizzes? Why is there not so much in this movement ongoing? Supporting Trump. Most don't support Trump. Trump matches to their ego image, that's why. And that's a lot of the cases. What is opposite planet? These are utter brutalists that have been engineering themselves without having the word engineer. That's some wacky dumbness, and that's like a lot of the case with extremism, whether some whackness, whether also mantiness from the extreme, a lot of the extremists of the groins. Hideousness, right? It's like one day before they were always, I said, one day once we switch, wait a second, you guys did something wrong, or something similar, whether more of us further distance away, whether not as much similar to if they involve suddenly no correspondence, and along with, and that's sort of on more of the track and field places, so whether more of less of the modernity suspicions, then eerily without much of a response, and no longer supports with, or whether joins with, or whether, and also no provide assistance to, or why it doesn't declare its hostility. While the sort of the opposite suspicions, or whether modernity suspicions, or whether the suspicions, or whether the opposites, and whether as reason of, or whether as reason of on which, whether as reason of which, or whether and whether just, and whether another, or whether reason of, and whether at the modernity suspicions, there comes partiness, and whether passive aggressiveness, and whether passive aggressive inflictions, and whether minor rather, and whether comes, and whether there comes the, whether there comes a deprecate interaction, deprecately, whether there comes this deprecate inflictions, and whether whether infliction sets probable of which, and whether probable of also to be of, and whether probable of to be of, probable of to couple with whether reason to couple with also whether the reason to also and whether to couple with also whether to reason to also to couple with whether another whether to couple with whether reason to couple with to could be of. So this morbid mass amount of existential the emphasis and whether also on that's been inflicting towards our guys being countering towards everything. Its average it's whether as reason and whether continues about reason and whether also continues about reason of perpetual factor churn. They cannot draw, it cannot sing, they cannot dance music, tons of infliction. There's probably some residue of from past school years still around us, and how much did these break the social trust, whether the social bonds. And I myself is prevented probably from tons of adventures, and I managed to pick up still and probably gathered whether still managed to receive certain lessons from some institutions that are utterly almost zero experience, whether you're next to none, whether very few, and whether very sockish waste. And neither should the standard really, and whether accommodate, whether shift to accommodate, whether shift to accommodate, and whether accommodate of whether shift for the opposite stuff. Usually this mention whether it considerable as minor literalization format, whether also literalization form of, and whether also format, and whether philosopher, and whether also and whether another whether form of, and whether reason to whether minor literalization, and whether literalization form of, and whether reason and whether another whether and minor rather and whether or and whether minor literalization form of sort of does sort of suggest the opposite via whether from whether with and whether through highlighting, whether with and whether from highlighting thereof as if it's being sort of a proper good, and whether sort of whether reason there, and whether you sort of a suitable choice. Reason there by the repronunciation to proper to be considered, and whether reason and whether sort of a suitable choice, and whether reason sort of a suitable choice of